Make up mine. Fight.
If you've ever played a fighting game, you're probably familiar with the concept of joke characters. Characters who, through deliberate design, wind up as some of the worst characters in their games due to their developers intending them to be funny rather than functional. Their concepts and in-game abilities are both intentionally bizarre and lacking. Think your Dan Hibikis from Street Fighter, your Neco arcs from Melty Blood, or your Dr. Boskonoviches from Tekken. Super Smash Bros., interestingly, despite having several series to pull from and a limitless supply of potential characters, does not presently have what I would describe as a dedicated joke character. There are characters that sort of half fit the bill or fill some of the criteria. Luigi and Wario have silly animations. Pichu is a weaker version of another character and was a joke character in Melee. Wii Fit Trainer and Piranha Plant have asinine concepts, etc. But they all fail to fully reach the heights of joke characters due to generally functioning perfectly fine as parts of the game's roster, despite their wacky concepts or animations. Some of them aren't exactly good from a competitive sense, but they're playable and certainly not intentionally bad. I've always been intrigued by the concept of giving a dedicated crossover game like Smash a proper joke character. Who would Nintendo pull from their vast lineup of IPs to fill the role of an intentionally wasted roster slot? That's what I want to try and figure out today. I took a look at every series represented in Smash and tried my best to brainstorm which ones I think could be the most apt to provide the game with a funny goofster into its roster. I wound up with 7 potential picks, and I'd like you to weigh in on which one of these characters you'd most vibe with as a joke. All that said, let's dive into the dregs and see who would be the funniest character to 3-stock someone with in Smash. Full disclosure, I'm treating most of the characters in this video, with 3 main exceptions, as glorified echo fighters who would act as intentionally bad, funny versions of already existing characters. This would keep the development of a joke character from eating into too much development and character resource time, and would make their inclusion much easier to stomach as a result. For our first pick in this category, we have a fighter who already fits the bill of a joke character in his home series, despite all of us loving him anyways. France's own Glass Joe from Punch-Out! Now, this one's hilarious, because Little Mac is already considered by a lot of people to be one of the worst characters in Smash, and a borderline joke character in and of himself. So what if we made him twiggier, frailer, took away a lot of his hefty grounded damage, and most importantly, made him French? That's what I'm thinking for Glass Joe. If you don't know, Glass Joe was Punch-Out's de facto first boss tutorial character, a frail weakling of a boxer with a 1-in-99 win-loss record, who typically only exists to familiarize characters with Punch-Out's mechanics in the mostly unintimidating way before throwing them to the wolves against the game's true contenders. He does not want to be here. He's very easy to both instantly KO and TKO, and often bemoans his career decisions between rounds while fighting him. As a joke character in Smash, I imagine Glass Joe basically being a version of Little Mac, who's much clumsier, much weaker, constantly falling over himself, and basically dealing Little Mac's aerial sour spot damage with every attack. Think of a Little Mac who fails to stop himself and stumbles over after performing straight lunge, or one whose KO punch doesn't even KO at like 120%. This design would almost certainly make him completely useless from a competitive standpoint, but would also make the occasional flex win with him extremely funny, and I can just imagine the Getting Glass Joe into Elite Smash challenge videos now. He's a great introduction for this video, as I feel no other character we'll discuss will reach his lows of patheticness for the rest of this discussion. It's all up from here. It's honestly kind of crazy to me that The Legend of Zelda, arguably Nintendo's #2 first-party franchise outside of Mario, only has 6 characters in Smash, with 3 of them being different variations of Link. It's even crazier when you consider the massive well of potential inclusions that Nintendo has willfully passed up over the years, from several great villains to plentiful helpful allies to even more recent Breath of the Wild era staples. A lot of people would call for characters like Midna or Tetra or Vati, but for me personally, and for this discussion, I've only got one thing to say. The Groose should be set loose. Yeah, so Groose kind of took over the landscape of gaming discussion for several years in the 2010s, and still remains a hallmark beloved Zelda NPC to this day. Starting out as a stereotypical cartoon bully that's one Letterman jacket short of being present in an after-school special, he has a really pronounced and enjoyable character arc throughout Skyward Sword, coming into his own as a hero by his own terms and being a useful ally to Link and the rest of the main crew, all while boasting one of the best designs and funniest theme tunes ever composed for a video game. He's probably probably the standout character from Skyward Sword, and one of the main reasons for the game's face turn in the general gaming consciousness for the past few years. As a potential joke character in Smash, I could easily see Groose being something of an Incineroar type character, throwing out these big lumbering moves and forcing the player to endure taunts, show-offs, and flourishes after each one, just without the devastating damage and knockback that Incineroar happens to boast. A very Patrick Warburton-coded moveset, if you catch my drift.
This is stupid. I want to talk about vaginas!
Give him a Loft Wing as a recovery move and a Groosinator final smash, and he could easily be a worthwhile, if silly, representative for what's currently one of the least depicted eras of Zelda in Smash. It's also criminal that he never got into Hyrule Warriors, a game that features characters like Marin and Tingle as playable, so let's let the Groose loose and give him his flowers as a well overdue joke character in Smash. If Zelda isn't Nintendo's #2 franchise, and if we're excluding licensing oddities like Pokemon, then the Big Red's runner-up has most definitely gotta be Kirby. Kirby, not unlike Zelda, has a massive pool of potential characters to include in Smash, from heroes to villains, and it's boosted even further by being the brainchild of Smash's own Masahiro Sakurai. My personal pick for a new Kirby character is and always has been Bandana D. I think calling him too generic or just an enemy with a hat is a smoking gun that you haven't played any game that he's in. But if we're discussing specifically joke characters, then I feel there's a certain slimy friend of Kirby's who's just right for the role. So I feel like people who aren't that familiar with the Kirby series might think that Gooey is just a generic enemy who uses his tongue to attack, but neither of those notions could be further from the truth. He's a friend of Kirby's, and more importantly, actually shares a lot of his abilities on top of his tongue whip. In Kirby's Dream Land 3, Gooey is the game's dedicated player too, and is capable of using his tongue to consume and copy enemies' abilities just like Kirby. He's also genetically similar to the series' overarching villain Dark Matter, giving him the ability to transform into a Mock Matter state and fly around and shoot lasers and stuff just like that villain. Gooey unironically has a ton of moveset potential as either a standalone character or a silly Echo Fighter to Kirby in Smash, and for our discussion here specifically, I feel as though we could make a strong, sillier alternative to his pink ally who could teeter just on the edge between joke character and fully fledged fighter. I see so many people propose so many different characters in the Kirby series for Smash, and always see people struggle to give Kirby specifically a potential Echo Fighter, when in reality, Gooey was always right there. He doesn't really mind though. He's currently licking his own eyeballs. Star Fox is in an interesting position as far as series represented in Smash go, because as it currently stands, all three of its playable characters are at least partially clones of each other. This makes the idea for coming up with a joke character of the series pretty easy, because when you've already got 3 space furries, why not have 4? When I was a kid, I was a real Leon Pawlowski truther. I really wanted this obscure reptilian Starwolf member to be in Smash for some reason. I guess to even the odds between Star Fox and Starwolf members, but as an adult, I fully realized that there are 2 obvious choices for a Star Fox joke character.
Don't worry, Slippy's here.
Slippy, watch out! Bogey on your tail!
This is a neat one, because I feel as though either Peppy Hair or Slippy Toad could work equally well as less nimble, jokier versions of what Fox and Falco already do in Smash. I could see them occupying entirely different niches, with Peppy being slower and clumsier due to his old age, or Slippy being faster and weaker due to his being Slippy Toad. Just imagining these two using variations of Fox and Falco's side B is really funny, and I could easily see the Smash team putting some really funny aesthetic flourishes on them. Plus, it would potentially give us a way to bring back the Landmaster, one of the only Smash series staples that was completely forgotten about in Ultimate. There's really not much else to say here. I feel as though Peppy or Slippy could be equally viable as joke characters, and if we could get more Star Fox characters into Smash to hopefully reinvigorate interest in the series, that'd be really cool. Just don't tell Nintendo that we're using Slippy. This next one is a little weird, a little wacky, because I struggle to imagine how this specific character could behave as a functional joke, yet he fills the role of one all the same. Pikmin is an underrepresented series in Smash as far as playable characters go. We've got Olimar and Alf as a reskin to represent Pikmin 1 and 3, but between the third game's other captains and the newly introduced content in Pikmin 4, I'd say we're due for a new Pikmin representative. And while I'd love to say Brittany or Charlie, there's a certain dangerous criminal eyeballing me right now who really wants to be talked about. Louie is a character I'm surprised isn't already in Smash. He seems like the most obvious Echo fighter this side of Shadow the Hedgehog, and he could easily act as a dedicated piece of representation for what's arguably the most well-liked Pikmin game in Pikmin 2. His reputation in the Pikmin community precedes him, you see. There are all kinds of memes and jokes portraying this guy as just the absolute worst, a total piece of living garbage, and I think that this aspect alone, combined with his characterization in the Pikmin series as an idiotic slacker and trouble causer, could help him fit into the role of a joke character entirely on their own merits. He's a joke character in his own series, so he'd slide right into that role in Smash. As for gameplay, I can't really conceptualize of a way that Louie could play differently than Olimar, but maybe Louie could have different Pikmin spawn orders or entirely random odds like Olimar used to have in the older games, but either way, Louie is currently a surprising omission from Smash that I know many Pikmin fans would love to play as and beat the shit out of in equal measure. Also, add Fiddlebert. This will be a quick one since the writing is entirely on the wall here, but I'd be remiss to make this video without discussing the original joke character. I mentioned him briefly at the top of this video, but considering that Ryu and Ken already set a standard for what a Street Fighter Shoto could look like in Smash, I think it makes entirely too much sense to talk about Dan Hibiki in this video. Just like how Sakurai addressed Ken as the original Echo fighter in his reveal trailer, Dan Hibiki is pretty much the original archetypal fighting game joke character. Rocking his iconic pink gi and deliberately lackluster inputs, Dan is the most iconic go-to example of this type of character in fighting games, and one that I'd be doing a huge disservice not to bring up. Considering that the groundwork for a Smash Shoto is already laid by Ryu and Ken, and that Dan is basically just an intentionally bad Shoto in his home series, I can't imagine he'd be that difficult to develop for. And not unlike Glass Joe from earlier, seeing insane online challenge runs and montages of Dan would be an absolute delight. Also, did you know that when maxed out, he's literally the weakest max level spirit in Smash Ultimate? Nothing left to say except Psycho style. The Mario series was easily the most difficult franchise to pick from for this video, because really, what do we realistically do here? There are so many avenues we could take. We could go with someone like Toad, a silly non-combatant that would get their clock cleaned in any fight. We could go with a generic enemy like a Goomba, but that role is already sorta filled by Piranha Plant. After some careful consideration, I realized that the most logical pick was right in front of me the whole time, and landed on a very obvious and popular choice for a Mario series joke character. He was right under our big pointy nose for this whole discussion. Yeah, so we all like to joke and argue about Waluigi being in Smash and how obnoxious and demanding his fans were during the run-up to Ultimate's release and its entire DLC cycle, but can we at least all agree that he'd make an amazing joke character? Any arguments about whether or not he deserves to be playable or if he's relevant or important enough kind of disappear when you design him to be deliberately asinine and intentionally silly. There's so much discourse about the idea of Waluigi being in Smash, but we never really consider the possibility that he could just be a silly jokester. You're really gonna be mad at a silly jokester? Considering the fact that Sakurai is aware of the intense demand for this lanky bastard and was infamously harassed ad nauseum during the whole window of Ultimate's release, I think it'd be very funny for him to choose to add Waluigi, but ultimately go, nah, I'ma do my own thing. I truly think that, with the right design mentality and moveset, Waluigi could be one of the most interesting and enjoyable joke characters in any platform fighter, and could easily silence a lot of the discourse by just being silly and enjoyable to watch and play enough. He's not a character that should be considered an earnest top-tier contender. That's not who Waluigi is. When we separate ourselves from the Redditors and the angry posts of it all, Waluigi could really find his own niche as Smash's premier funny character. He's a king among laughingstocks, but a king nonetheless. Now, before we close this video out, I do want to have a quick discussion addressing the concern of whether or not Super Smash Bros. Even needs a joke character. For some reason, people take this silly Nintendo crossover and the characters that are allowed to be included in it deathly seriously. So I'm certain that there are already some comments on this video getting mad at me for even humoring this idea. However, I feel as though in the hyper-competitive environment of fighting games specifically, platform fighters or not, joke characters can be a very important reminder to have fun and not not work ourselves into an early grave, treating games like a life or death matter. They remind us that the people working on these games are humans with senses of humor too, and that everything can do with a bit of levity from time to time. A joke character that might be seen as a wasted slot to one person probably got a big laugh out of someone else, or at the very least provided a fun couple of weeks to a developer working on a game. Video games are meant to be fun at the end of the day, and if even the most hyper-competitive, skill-intensive series like Street Fighter and Tekken have room for joke characters, then who are we to pretend that the funny Mario Punches Pikachu game is somehow too high and mighty for one? Couldn't be me. And there we have it. This was just a short little bonus video I wanted to make, as I've been interested in the concept of joke characters in fighting games recently. I've been watching a lot of videos about them and stuff, and recently relapsed on Smash Ultimate, so I figured the two would go hand in hand. I realized that I didn't cover every possible base in this video. I don't know every character from every series that's ever been represented in Smash. I'm sure like Xenoblade and Fire Emblem have some joke party members and joke units that would be really good. Same with stuff like Persona and Dragon Quest, and there's a million different Pokemon you could pick. So if you want to weigh in on this discussion, feel free to do so in the comment. Let me know if you have any ideas for joke characters. Either way, thanks, hope y'all had a fantastic day before, during, and after watching, and I'll catch y'all later. Cheers.